Chapter 11. The Battle with Death. Apollo's year as a slave was at its end. Admetus had been a good friend as well as a kind master. Apollo wanted to leave him with promises of happy future, for good fortune, long life, and many children. So, with his far-seeing eyes, Apollo looked to see what the future held for Admetus. What he saw made his face grow pale and his eyes grow large with horror. In a dark mist Apollo saw a shining thread. Pressed to the thread he saw the blades of sharp great shears. Around the thread he saw in the mist 3 ugly hags. One of these 3 held the shears in her bony hands. The 3 hags Apollo saw were the 3 Fates, goddesses of birth and death. One Fate sat spinning the threads of life, forever spinning, a thread for the life of every person born into the world. The second Fate gave color to the threads and wove them together, bright and dark, long and short. The third held the fateful shears, and cut each thread when it was no longer needed in the pattern. These were the hags Apollo saw. The third Fate was at the moment in the act of cutting the thread of Admetus's life. There was no future for Admetus. More swiftly than thought, Apollo acted. He went like the wind to where the Fates were and put his hand between the blades of the shears. Then, holding the shining thread in his hand, he begged the Fates for the life of his friend.
"No," they said, "the pattern of life cannot be changed, not even for you, O Apollo. The thread must be cut."
But the god would not give up, and because he was Apollo at last, even the hardest hearts of the Fates were moved.
"We will do what we can," they said at last. "A thread must be cut. They cannot be changed. But we are willing to cut some other thread instead of this one. If Admetus could find someone to die in his place, we will let him live."
Admetus was filled with joy when Apollo told him that his life could be saved. But his joy soon turned to sorrow. None of his subjects was willing to die for him, not one. They had risked their lives for him many times in battle, but in battle their end was always in doubt. Now, when death was sure, no one would take his place, not even his own mother or father. "But you are old, and I am young," he said to them. "You have lived your lives. They have been long, happy ones. My life has just begun. Won't you give your few last years to buy long years of life for me, your own son?"
"No,"
said his mother in her old cracked voice.
"No,"
said his father in his weak one.
"What right have you to ask us to die for you? The years of life left to us are few, but they are that much more sweet."
Then Admetus went home to his wife and threw himself in her arms. All his life he had been brave, but now, when he knew that he must surely die, fear overcame him. Life was good, he thought. Why must he leave it so soon? He was filled with horror at thoughts of that bony spectre Death and the world of the dead to which death would take him. "Dark, dark, all is dark," he wept. "Do not fear," said Alexius. Her sweet voice was like the voice of a mother soothing a frightened child. "Do not fear, my husband. I will go to death in your place. Let the Fates cut my life thread instead of yours." So Admetus' life was saved, but at a terrible cost. When Alexius lay pale and still, waiting for death, Admetus knew at last what his fears had done. He would have long life if it was true, but what was long life without his loving wife? Admetus cursed himself in his own weakness, but it was too late. Death stood at his door, demanding to be let in, and that is a demand no mortal can deny. Not even Apollo, standing beside the door, could make death go away without Alexius. When Apollo saw that his words could do no good, he turned his thoughts to the one man in all the world who might overcome death and take Alexius from him by force. That one was Hercules, the strongest man in all the world. Now, Hercules was Admetus' friend too, and he was at the time not far away. So Apollo put it into his mind to come and see his friend Admetus, and he came, not knowing that Alexius lay dying. And like that, the good friend he was, Admetus welcomed Hercules. He did not even tell him that Alcestis was dying. He wanted his friend to enjoy his visit, but Amyntas could not hide all his sadness. "Why do you welcome me with such sad looks?" asked Hercules. "And why are you wearing black? Is someone dead?" "A woman of my house is dying," Amyntas told him. "Today we must bury her, so I cannot make merry with you as a good friend should. But make yourself at home. You're always welcome here." Amyntas gave Hercules a room far from the sound of weeping, and sent him food and wine. Hercules ate and drank, feeling lonely without his friend. He drank more, and then more. Then, to cheer himself up, he began to sing. The men who were serving him became angry at the noise he made. "How can you show so little feeling for a friend's sorrow?" they asked. "Our queen is dying, and yet you're singing." "Your queen? Alcestis?" Suddenly Hercules was filled with shame for what he had done. "But Amyntas did not tell me. He did not want to make you feel unwelcome." "Who has ever had such a friend?" said Hercules, and his eyes filled with tears. Then he began to feel black anger and sorrow and shame, and a wild need to do something. "I will show Amyntas that I am his friend too," he shouted. "Let me find this Death. I'll take his bony neck in my 2 hands and never let him go until he gives Alcestis up. Show me where she is." "No one can overcome death," the men said. "Not even you, O Hercules. Besides, it's too late. See, the people are coming back from the tomb. Death is already with her." But Hercules would not be stopped. He pushed the men away and ran to the tomb. There he found the bony spectre standing beside Alcestis. The spectre's clammy hands were over her hands. His foul breath filled the tomb. Hercules took the spectre by the arms and pulled him away from Alcestis. Then he turned the thing around, and then he was frozen with horror as he looked into those 2 black eyeless holes and saw grinning teeth. For a moment he could not move. It was only a moment, but it was enough for death to shake him loose. Then Hercules felt the spectre's hand on his own neck. Bony fingers held him in a grip of iron, stopping his breath. The thing's cold, clammy skin made his own skin creep. And what strength! Who could have thought the bony thing could have so much strength in him? Hercules knew he had met his match. He took Death in the arms and squeezed. With all his strength he squeezed the bony body. Back and forth the 2 of them fought, but the fingers around Hercules' neck would not let go. Hercules was choking. Death was winning, and he grinned at the thought of taking mighty Hercules back with him to the world of the dead. With the last of his breath, Hercules cried to Apollo for help. With the last of his strength, he reached up and took Death's bony hands in his great 2 meaty ones. In despair, he tried to pull those hands away, and squeezed the bony things with all his mighty strength. Apollo heard his cry. The strength of Hercules' hands did not fail. As a dark mist began to swim around his eyes, Hercules felt bones crack. The fingers around his neck relaxed at last. Hercules had broken Death's grip. Gasping for breath, he threw the spectre from him. He stood for a moment to let the spinning in his head stop. Then he took Alcestis by the hand and led her out of the foul place. He led her back to her husband Amyntas, his good friend, and Apollo's friend. When Amyntas turned to thank Apollo, he was gone. The year was over. He had served his friend and master as best he could. There was nothing more to keep him. But Apollo knew he had only put Death off for a time. He knew that in the end Death would surely come for his friends, for they were mortal. Now, at last, Apollo's anger at Zeus was gone. It was true that Zeus had slain his 2 sons, but Death would have come for them in the end, for they too were mortal. And it was he himself who made them mortal, by loving mortal women. With this year on earth, Apollo came to know that his place was among the gods, not on earth with mortals. Only once more would he ever play a personal part in the lives of men. That would be in the great war between the Greeks and the Trojans. But that is another story. Postscript. Apollo is no longer worshipped as a god, but still men honor his name. It was for Apollo, god of the sun, that men named the chariot in which they first dared to go into the far heavens, out beyond the loving hold of Mother Earth. And it was to the moon that they went, to Apollo's sister's silver moon. Apollo, protector of mankind, sheltered the men on those first flights and brought them back safely home. And it is Apollo who makes the boldest promises for man's future in the distances of space. Apollo, God of prophecy. Thank you so much for listening to this audio rendition of Apollo by Katherine Miller, read to you by Michael Benedict.